Do you think America are doing the right thing in supporting Ukraine?
Do you want to be defeated or not? That's the first question we have to ask ourselves. As much as it's popular to say that the military-industrial complex owns Congress, that is the most bullshit I've ever heard, because it's just not true. Things that aren't true are stupid.
They certainly profit from war. What would you have done differently?
Now you have an angry, belligerent Russian army that also feels no consequences. And what do bullies do when they don't feel consequences? They keep bullying. And only a naive fool thinks otherwise.
What do you mean by populist?
My definition of it is essentially...
I don't think that is populist, because there's no elite involved in that.
So am I the elite?
You would be to some people.
Aren't you more elite than me? Fentanyl has not made its way in a serious way into Europe, but in America it kills 80,000 people a year. It's a serious issue, and I want to go to war with the cartels. Am I not opinionated enough? Sometimes I worry I don't speak my mind.
It's actually refreshing that politicians speak their mind. In this country, in Britain, very few of them do. Hello and welcome to the Winston Marshall Show with me, Winston Marshall. I just sat down with the American Republican Congressman Dan Crenshaw. He is also, of course, a former US Navy SEAL. We discussed American foreign policy under Biden, how it compared to that under Trump. We had a very close look at the Ukraine conflict with its huge escalation. Does he still now support Americans' support there of Ukraine, coming up to 2.5 years later? We looked at the Afghanistan pullout, what he would have done differently. We looked at the Israel-Hamas conflict, and this is where we found some difference of opinion. We looked at the difference between the populist right and what he might call the more traditional conservative right in America today. I hope that you will listen to this show. It's a different opinion to what I normally have on the show. I believe very strongly in diversity of thought, so it's good that we are all stopped from being pulled into an echo chamber. Before you hear from Mr. Crenshaw, I ask, if you want to support the show, all you have to do is press subscribe. If you do that, I can have more fascinating guests like Dan discussing the issues you want to hear about. But without further ado, Dan Crenshaw. Dan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me whilst you're here in London. I know you're an exceptionally busy man.
Busy? I don't know about that. We're busy. I don't know if we're productive, but we're busy.
So you interest me as a politician because on the one hand, you're a conservative Republican politician who, unlike a lot of American politicians, seem to fearlessly call out the progressive excesses on common sense. You take a common sense stand when it comes to, let's say, the trans issue. When it came down to lockdown, you're very vocal about that stuff. And on the other hand, you don't follow the herd within the Republican Party. You have been vocally, and you must correct me if I get this wrong, by the way, but I've seen that you've been vocally against the protectionist side of American American Republicans, against the populist side. I wanted to ask you about Ukraine, and maybe that's a good starting point of issues. We're now 2.5 years into that war, coming up to 2.5 years into war. Mm-hmm. You have advocated for American support of Ukraine. If anyone knows how horrific war is, it is you, as you know, your time in the Navy SEALs, in the Afghanistan war. But now looking at Ukraine, as I say, nearly 2.5 years on, we don't know exactly how many have died, but some estimates are up to 500,000. Billions of American dollars have been sent over there. It's pushed China and Russia closer together, and their economics are getting closer together. Russia's selling their energy to China. Not only that, there's a recent deal for North Korea to send 100,000 troops to fight for Russia. China have now sent troops into Belarus, and they're doing military exercises on the Poland border. It seems to me like things are really escalating. Only a couple of days ago, as we speak, the British new Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has advocated for British missiles to be launched into Russian territory at military targets. And at the same time, we have Russian boats and military boats off the American Atlantic coast. 2.5 years later, things have really escalated. Do you still do you think America are doing the right thing in supporting Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, everything you just said sort of supports my argument. Doesn't support the counter argument. Because, if the implication is that, well, the bad guys are really serious. I mean, I think we should quit. I mean, if that's the implication, then my God, what are we even doing? Who are we? I mean, just let China run the world.
Okay, well, in that case, at what point would things be escalated so much that it would no longer be worth it for you?
Yeah, I won't answer a hypothetical. There's so many factors involved in that question. It's almost an impossible one. But do you want to be defeated or not? That's the first question we have to ask ourselves. Does Western civilization want to be defeated or not? Do you want to go back to a pre-World War II era where wars of conquest were normalized? There was world wars, millions died. We didn't really have a global economy. You didn't have any of this cool stuff. We didn't do podcasts. We didn't do anything. We didn't go to space. We didn't have advanced medical treatments. We didn't have anything prior to World War II. Post-World War II, America started running the world. And what happened? You have free global trade, and you say, you cannot just invade people because you want their stuff. Now, was there war? Yeah, but it was all really civil war. If you look at it, Korean War, Vietnam War, the big ones, it's all civil war. Proxy wars, the Cold War, etc. There was no wars of conquest. There was no world wars. This is the first time that balance has been disrupted by major powers. That's kind of a real problem. I mean, it's like a really, really big problem. And I think we've gotten so used to the last 80 years of this American-led order that obviously the British and the Western world benefit from quite a bit, to the point where we've actually become way too lackadaisical on your defense. We've gotten so used to it. It's like no one knows what it was like before that. And before that, I mean thousands of years of history. It was just hell. So this is a way bigger strategic issue than anyone is thinking here. And just because we're a little scared is not a good reason to just accept a new order where China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela just learn the lesson. Because this is the lesson that they would learn if we were just like, it's not worth the money anymore, guys. We haven't lost one person, by the way. We say we're fighting, but that's a real misnomer. We are not fighting anything. We're giving them some bullets and they're fighting.
Do you think the enemies, adversaries of America have been emboldened by the war? I mean, China also have taking land in Bhutan.
Completely the opposite. Completely the opposite. If you decided right now to just say, look, we're done with Ukraine. I mean, I don't have to be an expert in international relations to know how humans think, right? Just think of it as if you're in a bar with a bunch of bullies, and that's the world, okay? And then some of you have bigger guns than the other, let's say bigger muscles than the other guy. Mm-hmm. And some of you are willing to pickpocket others and bully them, and some of you are friends, and some of you are enemies, just like the world. If you signal to somebody that, look, I'm going to be really upset if you beat the shit out of my friend, but I'm not going to do anything. What do you think that bully's going to do? He's going to beat the shit out of your friend and then take all this stuff, and then he's going to keep beating the shit out of your friends. Mm-hmm. And so what does that mean in the real world? It means an invasion of Taiwan quite quickly, because you've just signaled to China that they actually don't have to prepare to fight us over Taiwan. You've signaled to them that there's no way that we're going to defend Taiwan. And you've signaled to Iran that there's no way that we have the appetite anymore to defend Israel, to defend anyone, to defend any of our friends. And so then you have a world that is completely run by these dictators who have no interest in Western civilization, who have no interest in a global economy with free trade, where there's human rights, God forbid, and freedoms and democracy. They have no interest in that. And they have all the cards now and all the power because you've signaled to them that you will never do anything back to them. That is the most dangerous possible thing I can imagine.
Elbridge Colby, who's been touted to possibly be Trump's Secretary of Defense, is arguing that America is overplaying its resources and that it's actually weaker because of how much attention it's giving to Ukraine, to Israel and Gaza. Do you think there's anything legitimate about that position?
Yeah, that would be a big mark against him if he wants to be Secretary of Defense, because it's stupid. It's a numerically, factually stupid thing to say. When you're looking at the amount spent so far, first of all, you're looking at 5 to 10%, depending on the year, of defense spending, not of our GDP, not of our entire budget. That's 5 to 10% of just our defense spending. That's the kind of money going to Ukraine. And then we think about, okay, what actual money is going? Well, very little, as it turns out. What you're actually doing is you're dusting off old artillery rounds and old weapons that we really have no use for as Americans. You're sending those over, and then you're adding a dollar amount to that, and you're repurchasing them. So actually, you're getting a huge benefit, because when you repurchase those, what are you doing? Well, you have to buy in America. You're buying from our defense industry. As much as it's popular to say that the military-industrial complex owns Congress, that is the most bullshit I've ever heard. It's one of the stupidest talking points.
Why is it stupid? Because
it's just not true. Things that aren't true are stupid. If you want, that's the simplest answer I can give you. And there's no evidence for it. So, the burden of proof is on the person making the claim, not me. I'm the one in Congress, and it's just not true. There's not a bunch of lobbyists from Northrop Grumman trying to advocate for war, even though I know that's what Tucker Carlson likes to say, but he's a liar. So
they certainly profit from war.
There can always be profit from war. It doesn't mean there's people advocating for it. That's a weird single variable analysis, don't you think? But it's what people especially online, it's like what they go to. Okay, let's just have a single variable analysis. There's profit in war, therefore people who make the profit made the war. I mean, doesn't that sound kind of elementary?
Let me ask you from another angle then, which is that we've had Biden and Blinken's foreign policy for coming up to 4 years. We had Ukraine early on. We had the disastrous Afghan pullout, $7 billion at least of American military equipment left in Afghanistan. I've seen reports that some of that stuff managed to get to Gaza and used by Hamas. We also have of Israel and the Hamas war. What would you have done differently if you support, assuming that you support those two wars, what would you have done differently to Biden and Blinken?
Everything. That was one of the worst foreign policy disasters.
Yet you
ever.
Support the war. You support you support Ukraine. You support American supporting Ukraine, and you support America supporting Israel.
Yeah, so I'm pretty consistent here. So yeah, I support what we're doing in Afghanistan, leaving a base there, especially Bagram. Pulling out of Afghanistan was a huge error. So I mean that's pretty obvious in hindsight, but it was obvious to me ahead of time as well. It was told to Biden by his military advisors, same military advisors that Trump had. If you pull out, this will happen. You're not going to like it. Trump said, I want to pull out. And they said, this will happen. You're not going to like it. Trump said, fine, let's not pull out. Biden said, I want to pull out. And so he did. And he did it in this. There is no good way to do it, right? Like I watched like fools, even on my own side, try to intellectualize this. And they're like, well, I mean, you had to pull out, but you had to do it a different way. And I'm like, what? What way is that exactly? Like, how do you get to 0 troops and not have this situation? There is no other way, right? You need to keep Bagram, and that's it. There is no other way. And to keep Bagram, you have to have about 2,500 troops. But that's not 0. And if the political goal is to have 0 because you're just an idiot and you want to say something like that fits on a bumper sticker, bring the boys home, as if we're victims, right? Then you're going to get that situation, and then you're going to lose everything that we fought for. And what do we fight for? What do we have? People are like, what did you get out of Afghanistan? This is, the problem with American leaders is they never explain this to people in a simple way. What did you get out of Afghanistan? Everyone's like, nothing. I'm like, actually, you know what you got? No more 9/11s. That's what you got. That was the whole point. People like me go there and we stop any more 9/11s because they're too busy fighting me to plan another operation in New York or London or wherever it is. That's what you got. Now what you've got is, again, Taliban controlled, ISIS running around, Al-Qaeda running around. As our FBI director put it, red flashing lights everywhere. You've got terrorists coming across our border. They do not feel the pressure anymore. And the whole point of a war on terror is to feel the pressure. Everybody's looking for a win on a war on terror. There's no definitive win. You're not going to have a Treaty of Versailles. you are mitigating a risk that will exist for a very long time, if not forever, because there will always be this evil in the world. And you can either choose to ignore it and face the consequences, and then have to re-engage all over again, or you can be smart, mitigate the risk with a small footprint, which is what we had in Afghanistan. Very small footprint. We hadn't lost anybody in like 5 years. I wouldn't call it a war at all. I always laugh too when people say, "Get us out of Afghanistan." I would say, "Us? I don't remember you there. What's the weather like? Get us out of Ukraine." I'm like, "Us? Are you there? We're not there. Everybody calm down." You know, it's there's a real naivete to this idea that like the world is so large that you can ignore it. That was barely true even in the 1500s. Hasn't been true for a very, very long time. I mean, the French thought it was in their interest to come help us beat you guys.
Yeah, I'm reminded of that.
Yeah, but like it's an interesting that was a long time ago. You know, that was a really long time ago. The world was bigger back then, and yet it was still in their interest to do so.
And I would have said that was an antagonistic thing for the French to do to us.
Sure.
That example is brought up when it comes to recently in this country. Nigel Farage, who's leader of the Reform Party, newly elected member of Parliament, said that the EU had antagonized Russia. And if you're going to use the example of France in the independent war,
I could use a million examples. The point is like it was in those days, even back then, people thought it was in their interest to maintain some kind of leadership role. And that still interests them back home. Mm-hmm. Now, do they make mistakes? Of course. You could argue they made mistakes. I'm not going to argue about whether they made a mistake or not. But in our current world order, it would be a huge mistake for America to retract from the world.
So what Afghanistan, that's clear what your position is. What about Ukraine? Would you have done differently, seeing as you support the war? Then
yeah, well, Biden's massive mistakes there was tiptoeing it. Well, first he greenlighted it. First, he made comments prior to the invasion that were like almost inviting, or he gave the impression, as I was talking about earlier, if you tell a bully you're not going to fight them, they're going to do whatever they want. That's just how bullies work. And in this part of the world, they only respond to strength. This is the great thing about Trump. It's funny because Trump is painted with this sort of isolationist vibe, and MAGA is sort of taking that on, but that's not Trump at all. Trump did lead with the mantra of peace through strength. Mm-hmm. A lot of people like to say peace through strength, but they really don't like the strength part because it's uncomfortable.
So what you would have done differently is you would have
I would have escalated much quicker. I would have given them the weapons they needed much quicker. You would have pushed the Russians back much faster. You would have forced Putin into the position we want him in, which is a position where he wants to negotiate. He doesn't want to negotiate right now. Why would he? He's building tons of artillery rounds. He's just going to keep bombing the Ukrainians, keep bombing them. He thinks he can last a lot longer. The Russians have a history of this, right? They don't care how many people they lose. They don't care how many resources they expel. They just don't care. That's just how the Russians think. You have to get them to a place, and this is tough to get them there, but you got to get them to a place where they feel like they can't advance anymore, but they also have an off-ramp to save face. That's the ultimate goal, and I think that should be Trump's goal when he becomes president.
So we'll come back to Israel-Hamas then if we have time. But then Trump said in the debate with Biden, the first presidential debate, that if he was elected, he would get a peace deal done before he came to office. Do you think he could do that? And if so,
I have no idea what his plan is to do that. But he's much better positioned to do something like that than Biden is, simply because Trump has a history of talking pretty tough. Let's put it mildly. And his enemies don't really know when he's serious. That's actually kind of helpful. Basing it off of his history governing already, he does actually live by the mantra peace through strength. Unlike a lot of other people who are like peace through strength. And I'm like, well, what about the strength part? And they're like, it means like we're taking care of stuff at home. I'm like, is that what you think it means? You're an idiot. No, it means killing Soleimani while he's on a layover in Baghdad. That's what it actually means. It means doing things that are uncomfortable, because that shows your enemy that you're serious. And Trump was serious. So if anybody's positioned to do it, he'll do it. He's obviously laid out no plan for this, so how can I comment on it? But he's better positioned than Biden, that's for sure. Biden looks weak.
One thing no one has had a good riposte to this argument is under Biden, we've had 2 conflicts in Gaza. Under Obama, we had 2. Under Trump, we had none. We've had the Afghan pullout. We have Taiwan on the brink. It was just a complete, and of course Ukraine. It's just a completely different story when Trump was there. So even if people don't understand,
and Bush too. I mean, why? Because Bush, Trump, they mean what they say.
Well, it's pretty different with Bush because we had the Iraq War.
Well, yeah, because he wanted it.
And
you know what else happened? What else happened? This is, we got context is important with history. I like to, we don't have access to the multiverse. Okay, I ain't Doctor Strange, but if you did, that'd be the proper way to analyze history. You can argue whether Iraq War was a good idea or not. In hindsight, with the bad intel, you easily argue it was not great. But you might want to imagine a counterfactual. So let's say you never invaded Iraq. Okay, so now you have Saddam Hussein, who's still in power and still like mortal enemies with the Ayatollah in Iran. They're both in a weapons race. The reason we thought they had a weapons program was because he wouldn't tell us they didn't, and they kept kicking inspectors out. We're more or less at war with that, in a sort of state of conflict with them ever since the first Gulf War. And in the first Gulf War, what did we find? An actual weapons program. Okay, and the question was whether it was really shut down. They wanted everyone to think it wasn't shut down because why? Because that's deterrence against Iran. Iran was actively building a nuclear bomb back then. And then something happened in 2004. Does everybody remember what? No, nobody talks about it. But that's when the order came down from the Ayatollah that they would end the nuclear weapons program. Now, why is that? Maybe because we invaded fucking Iraq on the premise of a nuclear weapons program. What else happened? Gaddafi in Libya said, we're just kidding, we don't want nuclear weapons. So in the counterfactual, Libya has nuclear weapons, Iran has nuclear weapons, maybe Israel's wiped off the map at this point. That is a potential counterfactual. I can't prove it. I don't have access to the multiverse. But if anyone's going to assess history correctly, you have to assess counterfactuals. Let's do Ukraine. So don't support Ukraine. We hate him because, Zelensky was a comedian and he dances funny and apparently there's corruption, so they deserve genocide. Okay, so that's the argument, right? I mean, it's a stupid one, but that's the argument that I hear. Or a better argument is, it's just none of our business. So, whatever. Yeah, we did promise them in the 90s that we would protect them if they gave up their nuclear weapons. Yes, Ukrainians did actually fight with NATO in our wars. Yes, they did, even though they're not part of NATO. Yes, we've been training them and allied with them forever, but, who cares? Because what are friends? Okay, so that's the other argument. That's like, I'm paraphrasing, but that is what basically people are saying. Who cares? It's not worth the money. All right, so let's examine that scenario. So Russia would win. I mean, they would have won pretty quickly. The reasons that Ukrainians were able to fend off the Russians, especially around Kiev, was because of javelins and stingers and those kind of tank-killing missiles. I mean, because I've toured it. I've seen it. I've seen what the Russians did to Bucha, just this middle-class suburb just outside of Kiev. It's brutal. It's disgusting. Bombing. The stories there are mass atrocities. There's a lot of Russian tanks dead because of our weapons. So you have to assume none of that would have been available to the Ukrainians and the Russians would have won. So what does that scenario look like? So that scenario looks like the Russians really didn't lose that many people. They will have massively increased their industrial capacity to build artillery rounds, just like they already have. But they haven't lost anything either. They'd have a lot more public support back at home, which they were losing for a while. Of course, they, not exactly a free democracy, so they made sure that went away. But now you have an angry, belligerent Russian army that also feels no consequences. And what do bullies do when they don't feel consequences? They keep bullying. And only a naive fool thinks otherwise. And so now what? Now you're on the border of 4 more NATO countries, which we are treaty bound to defend. And some of those NATO countries have Russian-speaking populations. And what was Putin's excuse for invading Ukraine? Well, they have Russian-speaking populations. I mean, Zelensky he spoke Russian. He had to learn Ukrainian as he ran for president. Does everybody know that? It's normal to speak Russian in these places. Putin does not think he wants to rebuild the Soviet Union. He thinks in terms of he's like a next coming of Peter the czars. He's a czarist. He thinks in terms of Greater Russia, which does include the Baltics. If you think that he doesn't want to recreate a bridge between Russia and Kaliningrad, you're crazy. And I don't have to make this up. I mean, you can just read his speeches and his comments over time. Like these are things he believes in. well, it's more than just the Soviet Union's collapse was a mistake. I mean, he talks about what is
but
his.
Geopolitically, it was a mistake, specifically.
Yeah. But I mean, he said much more than that, I guess is my point. And it's a pretty clear signal. And how would he do it? I mean, he would, if you've already signaled you won't defend your friends, and now Putin is making the calculation that we won't even abide by an Article 5 NATO treaty, you have just set yourself up for the most dangerous war imaginable. Because we will abide by that, and he thinks we won't, so he's going to invade, and then we're in an actual war. That's what the counterfactual is. So anybody who says that they're against war, and that's why we shouldn't be giving Ukraine weapons, I'm sorry, but like, what? I don't know what world that is. Just to remind everybody, like, when there's a war, both sides have a say in it. We didn't start this war. It's funny because like the people are like, "Why are you such a warmonger?" I'm like, I didn't start this war, guys. Like, I'm dealing with the reality that we live in. I can pretend I'll write you a fiction novel about a different reality if you'd like. I'm sure it'll be really boring, but but it's not real. And it's just the strangest argument I hear from like people on my own side, especially like I don't know when our far right became like the liberal professors that I remember from Harvard. I mean, like they're like America's bad,
the populist right for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
the anti-war right is
it's become a little strange.
Similar to what the old anti-war left used to be.
They're exactly the same.
Apart from the first move, Biden's first moves in Ukraine, what else would you have done differently in the war?
Yeah, again, it's. I'm not sure I would complicate it over much more than what I just said. It's give them the weapons you're already giving them now, but do it earlier. Mm-hmm. You know, and there was a fear of escalation, and there was a valid fear of escalation about month 2 of the war. After that, it was invalid. You can ask any military person this. They're like, and this was Biden's choice. He was not getting this advice. His advice was good that he was getting, but Biden has a history of making very bad decisions on foreign policy, like a really, really long history. I'm not sure he's made one good decision. The idea that there was escalation was effectively dismantled within months. It's just not true, and that's an analysis of Putin's behavior. That's an analysis of the ground situation. It's just not true, because it's not in Russia's interest really and that's obvious still today as well. So
let me ask you about Israel then.
Okay, where's my water?
For me, the great grave error, the Biden-Blinken foreign policy, was reorienting back towards Iran, away from the Abraham Accords, which had been brokered under Trump, I think by Jared Kushner, if I'm to believe what Jared Kushner has said about them. And also there was the unfreezing of $6 billion worth of assets in South Korea. All of this on top of what I happen to agree with what you've implied earlier, which is that there was a sense there wasn't going to be the repercussions that there might have been when Trump was in power.
Right.
Do you agree with that sort of analysis? And do you disagree with any other aspect of Biden-Blinken foreign policy with regards to Gaza?
No, I don't. I mean, the analysis is probably about right. Would that have attack happened anyway? Yeah. So
do you think it would have happened under Trump?
That attack was going to happen. So two things can be true at once. The appeasement of Iran is not good. When you say focus, I think you meant appeasement, right? I mean, you meant unfreezing $6 billion. You meant
they went back to appeasing Iran.
Right, yeah. Right, yes. And,
JCPOA, etc.
Right, exactly. So that shows weakness. Iran takes advantage of weakness. That's just how it goes. Mm-hmm. Does that mean that was what created October 7th from Gaza? Not necessarily. These are, you know, you have to understand how these entities function. Iran, of course, supports Hezbollah. Hezbollah helps Hamas. They're allies, but you know, Hamas is not. They're not Shia Muslims. Okay, they're not like Hezbollah. Hezbollah is like, that's Iran. They're very close. Hamas is like oh, we like that they don't like the Israelis, so we help them, but they don't have like guys on the ground directing stuff, operationalizing this. This happens very much internally. So again, both things can be true. It's not good when you appease Iran. It could have contributed to the fact that Iran sent 300 missiles at Israel not too long ago. But that was probably a result too of Biden kind of starting to rhetorically pull back support for Israel, saying, "Hey, we're not so sure about your tactics here. Do that. That's fine, but do it privately. When you do it publicly, you invite aggression." And he doesn't seem to learn that lesson. He's saying it publicly because he has a left flank in the Democrat Party that really never liked Israel, has always been pro-Hamas, Palestinian. They think Palestinians are victims of Israelis. Obviously, that's a whole 3-hour podcast on how complicated that situation is, and we can argue about it all day. But from our interests, if you're trying to stop Iran from bombing Israel, you generally don't want to appease Iran.
Mm-hmm. So this is all touching on the populist right, which I'm curious because I've heard you speak before, and this is maybe where we would divide. And it's not necessarily on policy, but I would consider myself a populist. I'm not sure I would consider myself on the right because I see populist as an up-down thing rather than a right-left thing. But you...
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by populism.
What do you mean by populist?
When I think of nothing good, so no offense. It just my definition of it is essentially operating off of your feelings, telling people what they want to hear instead of the truth. That's
Isn't
populism.
That more sort of closer to demagoguery?
Sure, it's the same thing.
Well, actually, I would define populist as the politics of ordinary people in contention with an elite.
Okay, but who decides what the politics of ordinary people are?
Ordinary people.
Okay, they all agree?
No, of course they don't all agree, but that's...
But that's why you have to choose a side. That's why you have to choose principles. And so then populism becomes kind of ineffective and irrelevant at this point because you're saying, well, it's what the people want. Oh, you know what the people want? Tell you what, I'll find you 10 people on the street, common people, and you tell me that they agree on everything. You're full of shit. It's just not true. They all have different principles that they abide by. They have different opinions. There is no obvious populist sentiment. And somebody might say, well, it's what's popular, maybe statistically popular. Okay, so is that a principle by which I can govern? Because I'll tell you what, I'll poll people and I'll say, do you want $2,000 a month from the government? For free. No strings attached. Just, do you want $2,000 a month from the government? You think that's going to be a popular thing? Oh, yeah. Is that a good thing? Is that the right policy principle? Is that how I should govern?
I don't think that is populist because there's no elite involved in that.
Because it was just anti-elitism.
I think anti-elitism is a part of it. So,
but what's the governing philosophy behind that? Just to be against the elite.
Well, there can be a left-wing version, which is what Bernie Sanders was, and the elite for him was economics.
So am I the elite?
You would be to some people.
Yeah.
You're a politician in position.
I'm just a politician,
okay,
so I'm elite.
Let me give you an example.
Aren't you more elite than me?
Well, why? I'm a banjo player.
For who?
Well, let me give you an example.
For which band again?
Well, no longer.
Yeah, I know, but still, I mean, it's...
Yeah. On different metrics, I'm an elite. On different metrics, everyone's probably could be put in an elite somehow. But here's a version of right-wing populism, which I think, let's try and stillman this. Vivek Ramaswamy has said that if he were to, in his presidential campaign, and also I think he says if he were to become Veep, he'd want to dismantle the deep state. An example, I think that there's reason to have anger at the elites that are the deep state, or let's say the establishment. I'll give you two recent examples. One is that 51 intelligence officers have been found to have lied and said the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation, and that was absolutely used as a version of election interference in the 2020 election. And what we saw in the Twitter files, I bring this up because it's a topic I've covered a lot on my show, is we saw how the establishment, the political establishment, were covertly dealing with social media to censor conservatives, censor dissenting voices, those who had a worldview that was, let's say, anti-globalist or anti the establishment uniparty globalist worldview. So I think there's legitimacy.
But why does that have to make you a populist?
Because
I mean, I agree those guys are assholes, the 51 people. Now, they were not, they were all former officials. They have no standing. They just signed a letter. I don't know why we have to listen to that, but yeah, you're right. It was used in the public sphere to influence people.
So there's a
totally
huge sense that there is.
So, but why does that? But why do you have to just give up all your principles as a conservative and become a populist just because of that? Like we two things can be true at once. You can criticize that and want to dismantle it, and you can also not be an idiot. So, and then the other example, also true, right? Also true.
If you want to dismantle it, though, then I would say you're a populist.
Absolutely not. You'd be a conservative. You'd be a limited government conservative.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so because what is a limited government conservative? It just means less undue power to people in government. I mean, that's what it means. It means abiding by our founding principles, one of which is free speech and the inability of government to actually influence that free speech. Now, in one of those cases, that's a lot more shady than the other case. In one case, look, anybody who's out of government has the right to sign a stupid letter. You can be mad about it all you want, but what are you going to do? Throw them in jail? What does that make you? It makes you a far left dictator. That's what it makes you. It makes you anti-founding principles. So if you want to be a populist and call it that, I'm not with you. Okay, I'm with you in criticizing them, but people are like, throw them in jail. Oh, okay, Mao. I mean, what are you like? What are you serious? Now, there's a different case to be made if people are using government power to actually influence things. That in those cases, it's a little bit more complicated than that. They're basically like saying, hey, we think this is disinformation. The social media companies, because they agree with it on their own accord, they're not being forced to do anything. That's why nobody's in jail. Because nobody's being forced to do anything. The social media companies were corrupt in and of themselves in the sense that they are biased, they're left wing, and they're doing it anyway. They were going to do it anyway, whether the government pointed it out to them or not. So you can have problems with those things, but why would you give up basic conservative principles in the process? Vivek, and just don't even get me started on him. I mean, the guy knows about venture capitalism. Okay, I've had him on my podcast. He's a smart guy. He knows about venture capitalism. Don't tell me that he knows a damn thing about government or the deep state. He doesn't know anything. There is a deep state, right? But what is the deep state? The deep state is people who are in a position and they have a decision to make, right? They're bureaucrats. They're paper pushers. All right, well, there's always room for some subjectivity in that decision, okay? And if they have bias, they might exert that bias. The worst case of it that we've seen in recent history is Crossfire Hurricane under Trump, right? So when Peter Strzok and his minions lied to the FISA court to get a Carter Page warrant. I mean, that's like the most, like probably one of the worst examples we can find. It does happen. It's not unreal. And one of the biggest mistakes Trump made, or not a mistake, or just he didn't know any better. I guess it was his first year as a president in politics. But you've really got to put your people in the political appointed positions. This is something, we have thousands and thousands. You guys don't have like any. But we do. The president has a lot of power to really reshape that administrative state. And he's elected again, that'll be a big priority.
Because that was a mistake.
But I'll tell you who won't help, Vivek Ramaswamy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know the government. It's just that guy just knows bumper sticker slogans. That's about it. I've really little respect for him because I've seen what he was before he started to get on the campaign trail, and I saw how he talked after, and it's just a totally different person. And I have zero respect for somebody who is totally different prior to just wanting to become famous with a certain subsect of the population. Like you're an obvious grifter, you're an obvious liar, and I hate that people are tricked by it.
I haven't got much of your time, and there's hundreds of things I wanted to ask you about, but seeing as I don't, I wanted to end on a positive note. We've talked about war, and you have been part of a positive campaign trying to, this is related to National PTSD Awareness Day last month, and trying to bring in psychedelic treatment for veterans suffering PTSD. I don't know very much about this, and I'm sure I'd like to know about it. I'm sure my listeners would love to learn about what exactly is going on here. What's the latest in this kind of treatment?
Well, where do I begin? So there's a growing amount of evidence that shows that various treatments with different psychedelics, MDMA, psilocybin, ibogaine, DMT, 5-MeO, have some pretty profound effects on reducing, if not eliminating, the symptoms of PTSD. I discovered this a few years ago, and I've been trying to get it into legislation for some time now. I finally succeeded in that recently because I found out some of my friends had gone down to Mexico and done an ibogaine treatment. So ibogaine is, all of these treatments are very different. Like MDMA, you might know, is ecstasy. Psilocybin is mushrooms, but ibogaine is kind of like more like ayahuasca. If people are familiar with that. So it's not a recreational experience at all. It's a very difficult experience. And then, but they come out of it and it's like a brain reset. I've never done it, so it's hard for me to speak to it, but I'm telling you what they told me. And it just changed them and in their words, saved their marriages. And I'm like, so one day, cheap treatment? Like, what's going on here? They go down to Mexico because there's a nonprofit that just does the clinic down there because that's, you can do anything you want in Mexico. And so that got me turned on to it, looked into it more, thought, okay, there needs to be more data on this. And so the legislation I pushed through was simply you're forcing the Department of Defense to actually fund and sponsor the clinical trials. And you're allowing active duty to be part of those clinical trials. So that's where it stands now. There's one application going to the FDA for MDMA. I don't know if it'll go in or not, but there's a lot more. And the FDA, I think, is forward-leaning on this. They've developed guidelines for how to do the clinical trials, which is a positive step. I just think you're talking about something that's pretty cheap. You're not looking at a lot of treatments, and it's saving lives. I mean, it's very impressive. So Stanford has a good study on this now. The VA has sponsored studies on MDMA, and the results are just astounding. So you need more data. You got to remove the stigmas.
Was it the stigmas that were holding it back in the first place?
Oh, sure. I think so. Yeah. Yeah. It's psychedelics. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, that seems very positive. I know that you've had a lot of positive feedback, so I wish you much luck.
Yeah, that one brings people together. You got Matt Gaetz, AOC, me, all working on it. It's wild group.
That sounds like a while. But AOC is your neighbor in
Congress. We're neighbors in the office. Yeah, your office is right next to mine. Oh, yeah, so you come visit me. It's Andy Biggs, AOC, then me. It's quite the hallway.
I bet it is. Dan, I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Enjoy your trip whilst you're here in London. I'm sure that my listeners will have found that thought-provoking to say the least.
Yeah.
Is there anything else?
Am I not opinionated enough? Sometimes I worry I don't speak my mind.
It's great that you do.
I don't think
everyone did.
I don't think that's a risk we took here.
It's actually refreshing that politicians speak their mind. In this country, in Britain, very few of them do. I wish they did. Even if I disagreed with them, I wish they spoke their mind. Is there anything you felt like you'd like to mention before we say goodbye?
Well, there was a lot of topics. We didn't get on immigration and the cartels. I mean, one of my biggest focuses is the cartel. This isn't super interesting to European listeners, but it might be one day. Fentanyl has not made its way in a serious way into Europe, but in America it kills 80,000 people a year. It's a serious issue, and I want to go to war with the cartels. It's a constant theme, isn't it? The difference between the cartel issue and all these other issues is that literally everyone across the right-wing spectrum wants to go to war with the cartels. So, and they're always trying to outdo each other on how to do that. I lead the task force in Congress on the chairman of the task force to combat Mexican drug cartels. I've made multiple trips to Mexico. This is a very, very serious problem. And, for our country, on our southern border, you have a country on the verge of collapse and no one's talking about it enough. I mean, there's a true insurgency there. I'm hopeful with the next administration. It can't be worse than the last one. But we need to partner with the Mexican army in a very drastic way to stop the cartel influence. It's that simple. So that would be if you want to talk immigration, that's a whole other conversation too.
Well, let's have that conversation next time we see each other.
Sounds good.
Dan Crenshaw, a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching The Winston Marshall Show. If you want to check out another episode, I highly recommend this one here.